تجيبوا لنا نسوان بكهرباء كمان.
هيجيبوا نسوان، انا سمعتها في اذاعه لندن. في نظام بالكهرباء يا مرعاشتي، بس بلطها عالي عليك شويه.
So let's, we have here Professor Walid Mahdi, University of Oklahoma. He published, his book, Arab American Films, from Hollywood and Egyptian stereotypes to self-representations. Focus on how Arab Americans were portrayed in Egyptian film. And he talked a little bit about the difference between Hollywood stereotypes and Arab Americans and Egyptian cinema stereotype of Americans. Everybody has an oversimplified way of portraying the complicity of Arab Americans one way or another. Somebody will put emphasis on Americans' dreams and the Arabs are lost, whatever, and the other one will put on the, emphasis on being an Arab and being an Egyptian, and you've been victim of the illusion of American dream.
So all representations of Arab Americans or Egyptian Americans in particular in this sense seem to yes, it's different from Hollywood in a sense because it's complicated. It talks a lot about gender, about nation, about generation. It adds a lot of complexity to understandings of Islam and identity that Hollywood never cares about, because for Hollywood, Arabs Americans are just either terrorists or foreigners who are trying to sabotage this country. But for Egyptians, the story is complicated, yes, but still there is a binary to that. There is a black and white thing, that in order for filmmakers to produce this Egyptian national sentiment, they just cannot seem to see such a thing as Arab American. You gotta be either Arab or American. And if you're American, then you're denigrated, you're vilified, and if you're Egyptian, you're glorified, and you're described as hero and as good in some way. And if you're American, you're somehow presented as bad. And it's so much not so much a sense of anti-Americanness, and that's something I'm saying in the paper, in the book actually. It's more of a critique. It's an anxiety that it's a nationalist anxiety around the fact that people are having sense of despair with Egypt, and they need many of these filmmakers. They try to offer a sense of hope to many Egyptians to think of Egypt as a place where they could really build their own dreams. Think of the Egyptian dream. Don't think of the American dream. Think of the Egyptian dream.
زيارة الرئيس.
Oh yeah, that's very
interesting.
Have you watched that film?
No, I didn't see it, but I lived it.
Well, actually, this film, يحدث زيارة السيد الرئيس is based on a novel. كتبت. It was written back in the 70s, actually, following the Mr. Nixon's visit to Egypt. So it was a critique. The novel itself critiqued the idea that with Nixon's visit to Egypt and Sadat's promise of infitah as a open doors or like policy openness to the West as a ticket to heaven for Egyptians, that now Egyptians are ready to move into US camp and things will just, capitalism will be embraced, neoliberal economy will open up things, private sector will get nourished, American support will come, and then the society will flourish, So there's a lot of hope, right? But at the same time, there was a realization by people that this was further from the truth in a way. And the novel يحدث في مصر الآن was released around that time. There were attempts to adapt it to a film at that time, but the Raqaba censorship denied it. In Egypt, the Egyptian censorship denied that particular film because they said this will damage our newly established relationships with the United States. That was the main reason.
One film.
That specific film, يحدث في مصر الآن, transform it to a film,
ولسه جاي. اي والله. معقوله؟ اي والله. بيقول لك ان المراكب الامريكاني واقفه في الميني محمله بضايع فوق بعض كده 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 كده.
Paranoia among filmmakers about immigration, that Egyptians are deserting Egypt, that there is a sense of despair in the country, that maybe some start seeing migration as the ultimate way out out of the state of misery that Egypt is going through. And then there was a stream of films produced in the 90s, and until now, they instituted a culture of narration that discourages the idea of immigration in search of success somewhere else, and invest in the idea that you have to come back. You have to come back to Egypt and invest in your own success in this country. This country will give you everything that you want, basically, to succeed. The American dream, for example, if you're seeking the American dream in the West, many of these films create a sense of despair. Feel like this is not a dream, you know. If you travel to America, you'll end up being discriminated against. You'll end up dying in ghurba, in alienation. You know, you'll somehow feel like you'll be starting to break away from your traditions and religion and ethnicity and cultures, and you'll be left alone in a way. So come back and invest in Egypt. So it was a very nationalist, all these films, and these are very, they range really from sophisticated artistic films like Yusuf Shaheen's works that many people didn't watch anyway, and only the elite and educated and intellectuals saw, and the artists. And there are popular films like Hello America, Adil Imam. I think everybody saw that. صعيدي في الجامعة الأمريكية, for example, in the late 90s. People didn't like, by the end of the 90s, there were not many moviegoers attending cinema. But صعيدي في الجامعة الأمريكية came in and energized the movie-going experience in Egypt. So this is a film that I talk about. And as late films as Asal Iswed or Talq Sinai, there's a consistent sort of interest in creating that sense of Egyptian national investment in Egyptian nationalism, and discouraging any attempt to move away from that, to break away from that.
ما قلتليش بقى على اسم المحطة لإذاعة الخبر، اسمها ايه؟
لندن يا استاذ.
ايه؟
لندن.
ايوه يا ابني، ما انا عارف انها لندن، بس لندن البلد ولا لندن المحطة؟
لندن ستيشن.
لندن ستيشن يبقى لندن البلد. مفهومة دي؟
I live in Egypt where the Egyptian dream presented in films was going to Lebanon. He cannot do it in Cairo. He has to go to Lebanon and get rich or get corrupted and comes back as if Egypt is not. There is a sensibility that's overplayed here. And film are made in the Arab-Muslim war, made by a Muslim or made by a non-Muslim American Western. The identifiers was how many call for adhan, and more than 6 times a day. This is made by non-Muslim non-Muslim Western, and if it's 4, that Muslim Western, like Egyptian, whatever. And if you don't see any adhan in the film, that means that made by an Arab Muslim. So what is this, the identifier of Arab Americans?
That's a very good point. I think it's what you said is very important, which is really, how do you classify these films in a way, right? It's very complicated in the case of Arab filmmakers, because there has been a trend in the past 20 or 30 years where you see independent filmmakers, Egyptians, Palestinians, Lebanese, Arab filmmakers seeking support from European funders, for example. Like a film like Wajda, for example, the very first film by a Saudi filmmaker. She got support from a German production, and the end product is very authentic because you present a very Saudi vision. Director is Saudi, the actors are Saudis, the story is Saudi, but the audience is European, So the authentic portrayals of Saudi culture is so much not necessarily directed to Saudi audience as much as it is directed to European audience. That complicates, for example, one's understanding of, is this really a Saudi film or not, right? It's a Saudi because the director is Saudiya. يعني بس الإشكالية, the problem is that the film caters to Western audiences rather than it does to Saudi audiences or Arab or Muslim audiences, you know. And there's a trend of those films produced like that, co-produced or funded directly by European partners, and the audience for those films is European, and you end up with films that feel authentic, but the story, the framing, the narration, the presentation caters to Western rather than Eastern audiences. And there's another trend, which is that some filmmakers do not get any support from European or American or any foreign sort of entities. They produce the films using their own budget. Let's say $50,000, $100,000. They shoot a film with that budget, and they go and sell the film to European companies, you know. And so from the very beginning, the directors invested in this project with the anticipation that I have to sell this to Western markets. So you end up again with authentic portrayals, but are they really authentic? Are they really speaking to audiences in the Arab world or Muslim world, or are they speaking to market-oriented, in this case, European and American markets in general? And with the rise of Netflix and Amazon and Hulu, you see that taken to a global scale. You see now these companies give budget to so many Arab filmmakers and series filmmakers, and tell them, yalla, you get this money and give us an authentic story. But that authentic story is not authentic because it doesn't speak necessarily to audiences in the Arab world, because not everybody has Netflix, but it speaks to those who have Netflix subscriptions, most likely folks in the United States. So there is that complications that I think everybody should be aware of when we think of filmmaking, identifying filmmaking in the Arab world. But when it comes to Arab American filmmaking, I think the way I went about it, because it's just hard to go about classifying things, but I relied on the fact that whether the filmmakers are Arab Americans, one, and whether they presented the films as representations of Arab Americans, and whether they took into consideration that these films talk to Arab Americans. So these are the three main ways through which I identify Arab Americans films. Are the filmmakers Arab Americans? Are they basically saying that, claiming that these representations are Arab American representations? This film is about Arab Americans, like America, for example, film America by Shirin Daibis. She promoted it as an Arab representation of Arab Americans, right? And the third thing, does it really talk about talk to Arab Americans beyond what Hollywood and Egypt does, which is basically ridiculing the fact that there is such a thing as Arab American? Because for Hollywood, there is no such a thing as Arab Americans. Mostly you're either Arab or American, and for Egyptians it's the same thing. You're either Arab or American. So they don't necessarily talk to Arab American audiences, right? So these are the three main factors, basically.
What is it?
شوكولاتة شوكولاتة الودينا شوكولاتة 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 الودينا شوكولاتة اغمقت واسمرت.
You talked about Shikabika.
America Shikabika. Abracadabra.
Shikabika, of course, it represents a land far away that you don't know much about it, that you take a risk because you don't even know what Shikabika is, and that's America.
Yeah, that film and many others, like Ard al-Ahlam, for example, produced around same year. They rely on very important cultural element that exists in Arabic collective understanding, which is al-ghurba. Ghurba, yani, it's mixed of alienation. You're feeling alienated because you're away from your home, and you are in a different new place, right? And there's at the same time constant feeling of nostalgia. You want to go back to your home, right? And that I think the filmmakers in Egyptian cinema relied a lot on that. That again, because they are mobilized by investing in Egypt. So whoever leaves that Egypt then is bound to go through a lot of heartbreaking moments, you know. The sentimentality of it is very important. Like in America, Shikabika, they want to go to America, but they don't go to America. They go to Romania with the hope that they would go to America, but they never go to America, right? And they spend weeks, days, weeks in Romania trying to prepare themselves to go to America. They are wearing jeans, they are drinking Coca-Cola, they're preparing themselves to America because they're consuming America from afar. But it's not, that consumption is not in Egypt, which is interesting. The consumption is in Romania, still a foreign place. So one ends up dying there, and the oldest in the group, and it's 8 people there, right? One ends up dying, and forcing everybody to think twice about whether there is a realization of success away from home, whether it's really possible to think of America as a land or that will ever reach, and if they reach, they will ever be able to succeed. Because of, guess what? It's Egypt. You know, your only success is in Egypt. Egypt is the place where you're supposed to come back, bring back your energy, and invest in your own home. So there is a lot of that. You know, thinking of foreignness in a way as a scary factor in to scare migrants away from thinking of leaving Egypt. You know, there's a very interesting line by in Asal Iswed, Black Honey, in 2010 film, which one of the actors say basically why everybody seem to think that of Egypt as a place where they want to get buried in. You know, Egypt is not a cemetery. It's not Maqbara. You know, why people think of Egypt as a place, oh, by the end of their lives, I will go back and die there, you know, or bury myself. Yeah. Why people don't think of Egypt as a place where they could live and exist and create their own aspirations and dreams? Why Egypt has to be thought of as a place, وكأنها خرابة, you know,
big cemetery.
Big cemetery, right? Well, and so there's a lot of that sentiment, you know, it's very national, very Egyptian, you know, it's like a very much investment in cultivating one's Egyptianness, you know. You're right to say that audiences, because the audiences are primarily Egyptian in this case, they want Egyptians who pay the tickets for those movies to come out with that sentiment, you know, that yes, I love Egypt and I will be more than happy to continue with my misery and just go through a lot of what I go through in order to realize my hope and success in this own country, you know.
Being poor in your own home is better than rich in Ghurba.
Yeah, exactly. I cultivate that feeling, at least, especially among the poor.
America, 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 شيكا بيكا. أمريكا شيكا بيكا. أمريكا شيكا بيكا. أمريكا شيكا بيكا. تلعبك عالشناكل وتجيب عليك وطيك.
I started this book in Minnesota 10 years ago, and you probably heard by now with the Hollywood, Hollywood. We don't have a Hollywood, but we have a Holy Land debacle. A holy war here after this race is anti-Black and anti-Semitic and homophobic comment, I would admit, 6 years ago. But that started a debate and a conversation in the community, in the Arab American community. Let's talk about Arab films and how they portray darker skin and Black people in Arab film. I grew up with film. It was very common to have the Bawab, you know, the guy landlord is Osman. Always his name is Osman. And I don't know what Osman, what that name is, but always from Sudan. And it didn't really bother us that much. We accepted that. And so tell us how Arab film dealt with racism within the Arab culture.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. It's a very important question, I think, and one that has increasingly been talked about in the Arab world. To what extent is media and Arab-based cinema responsible somehow for perpetuating the sense of injustice, discrimination that blacks in particular face in the Arab world. And as you know, the Arab world is divided by is informed and by layers of interactions with Africa, and there are also constructions of blackness within with how that happens within each state country in its own way. You know, in Yemen, for example, we have our own local dynamics with blackness, and Egypt you have your own local dynamics with Nubia, and every country has its own local dynamics with blackness that is distinct from the dynamics that exist with Africa in general. So when it comes to cinema and pop culture in general, I think I could see three important stereotypes, if you like, or issues. Maybe issues would be the better way. The Bawab, the Bawab issue. Let's call it the Bawab issue. The first one. What's interesting about the Bawab is not the Bawab itself. Of course, that's a very important stereotype, right? Of Sudanese like or Egyptians speaking in a broken Egyptian sort of way. And I think what's problematic about that issue is that it tends the bigger problem that it highlights, which is how blacks in particular were assigned only specific stereotypical roles. You wouldn't see blacks in Egyptian and broadly, really Arab cinema in general, assigned roles that are beyond their own ethnicity, you know, their own color. So they're always brought only to serve certain stereotypical roles, possibly for comedy and possibly for not. But the idea is they have certain stereotypes. They want some blacks to authenticate those stereotypes, so bring them on. You don't see them serving in bigger ways, right? Except there are some interesting deviations from the norm, like Khawaja Abdul Qadir, for example. Fakhrani, played by Yahya al-Fakhrani, is a Khawaja who goes to Egypt, and there's a very interesting character, a Sudanese character of a person who is supposed to inspire him to Islam. So those roles are very few, but the overwhelming majority of roles are really subsidiary. زي ما قلت, as I said, you know, just Bawab or some sort of menial works. So there's that issue, the Bawab issue, and it's not just about the Bawab itself, it's about the lack of ability to include black characters in bigger roles in a way. There's the other dynamics of it is that which is the flip side of this, is sometimes they don't even have to care about having a black character to play a black actor to play a black character, you know. They just black their face, you know, just color their face to basically portray those characters in a way, what has become known as the blackface phenomena. It's a big thing here in the US. It has its own intricate, complicated history.
Gone with the Wind, you know, the biggest film ever made, Hollywood made. Now it's brought down like all this is statues, racist statues, you know. I mean, they admitted this is a racist film.
There's been some conversations to try to change this culture, but there is a lot of ignorance and sometimes resistance to it in a way, because they seem to say that it's just a joke. We don't care. We don't perpetuate racism. We don't hate blacks. But with that, there's a lack of sensitivity to other people's understandings of themselves, and in general, the blackening of the face is done for comedic purposes. When Nasser al-Qasabi does it, it's safe. He's just a comedian. Let's just let him do it. When Ahmed Fahmi does it في مسلسل ريح المدام, it's okay. Let him do it. It's just funny. When Shayma Yusuf does it in her candid camera show, but she just blacken her face and she starts screaming and crazy, acting like crazy in non-comprehensible language to scare others, and it's an entertainment, right? So it's done for those purposes, justified in those lenses, but it's problematic in every possible way, right? So there is that, and there's a third aspect of it, the third issue, and I think the beauty issue, that how beauty is, women beauty in particular, or men for that matter, really, is associated with fair skin as opposed to dark skin, right? So when women, black character women are brought up, like Muhammad Hinidi, Saidi في الجامعة الأمريكية, for example, and effectively most of Muhammad Hinidi's films, you see, if you need to look at offensive portrayals of blacks in cinema, in Egyptian cinema, just pick any Muhammad Hinidi film, and you most likely will see offensive stereotypes. So in that film, Muhammad Saidi في الجامعة الأمريكية, he brings characters of Nubian actors, but then there would be jokes about them in a way throughout the film, and not only that, in many other films, that jokes that all of a sudden dunya ظلمت, it's become dark, or that thinking of those women are ugly, not beautiful, and seems to think of them sometimes as prostitutes, as available or unimportant sort of bodies out there, in a way that you could use and abuse without having to face any sort of sense of repercussions. And this is not an Egyptian cinema thing, it's an Arab pop culture thing. And if you look at Maryam Faris, for example, in a very popular song, Gumurgusi, something like that. The title of the song is Gumurgusi. And throughout the video clip, she impersonates various African characters. And then she blackens her face. She acts like she appropriates all other African cultures in a way, in ways that seem very insulting, I think, personally. And to see producers of that show think that it's okay to do that, is quite a problem.
It was very interesting books. It talks about a lot of films made about Arab American by Arab Americans, and comparing it to how Hollywood depict Arabs and Arab Americans, and how Arabs depict Arab American. And as you say, this binary that we are as an Arab Americans, writers or professor or citizens, are torn apart by being, stereotyped as a terrorist, as whatever, not patriotic, and the other one not authentic or not traditional enough. And
من بوركينا فاسو وناداني سيلفي النايكي وهلبس بدع